These Navy men were about to experience the greatest hell, all because they intercepted a mysterious submarine that appeared out of nowhere. The day began like any other for the crew of the Orion, a Coast Guard vessel patrolling about 3 miles off the coast. It was a routine operation, something they had done many times before. As part of the Coast Guard, they had a clear mission to ensure safety at sea and respond to any anomalies. For these men and women, the ocean was a constant danger, especially when working on it. Even as professionals prepared for any situation, their extensive experience had taught them to respect it and to fear it. After all, the ocean had always held secrets, some darker than anyone could imagine. The clear skies and calm waters could change at any moment, but it wasn't a storm that would surprise these sailors. What they would find beneath the seemingly calm surface was something no one could have predicted. It was just another routine day until one of the radar operators noticed an anomaly, a strange sound picked up by the sonar waves that barely registered on the monitors. At first, they assumed it was a technical glitch, at least for the first few minutes. But since they were close to the area, they decided it couldn't hurt to investigate. As they navigated toward the site, one of the Coast Guardsmen spotted a bright blue object on the horizon. The crew knew they had to investigate. As the Orion approached, the floating object became clearer. At first, they thought it could be anything, debris, a small boat, especially from a distance. But something didn't add up. Its metallic blue surface seemed designed to blend into the water like camouflage. This was disturbing and made it difficult to distinguish from its surroundings. It was the kind of design typical of a ship built for sensitive or covert operations. Adding to this was the fact that the radar had trouble detecting it consistently. The object would appear and disappear from the system, leaving only the Orion's position clearly visible on the monitors. It was as if the floating object didn't quite exist. With no identifying markings, no lights, and no visible movement, the crew could not rule out the possibility of a hostile encounter. They sent out a radio call to establish communication, but there was no response, not even a static echo. It was as if the object was lifeless. As they drew closer, more details came into focus. The ship was larger than it appeared at first glance. Its elongated shape, smooth surface, and strange lines didn't fit any conventional nautical design. Finally, the captain gave the order to move in closer for a closer inspection. They decided to throw a line with a hook to secure the object and tow it toward the Orion. The discovery and descent. A standard procedure in such situations, but despite their coordinated efforts, the object didn't move an inch. Instead, the opposite happened. When they applied force, it was the Orion that began to slide toward the object. It was then that they realized it was far more massive than they had anticipated. Under these circumstances, the captain made the decision to assign 2 of his men, Brendan and John, to board the ship and explore. Equipped with flashlights, tools, and radios, the 2 Coast Guardsmen climbed to the surface of the object. Up close, its design looked even stranger. As they walked across the metal deck, they came upon a hatch at the top. Carefully, Brendan and John opened it. The lid made a deep creaking sound that echoed in the still air, revealing a narrow passageway leading into the ship. Shining their flashlights inside, they could see a rusty ladder descending into the mechanical darkness. The 2 men exchanged glances but decided to proceed. As they moved deeper into the ship, they realized it was an abandoned submarine, cold and oppressive with a metallic smell and an eerie silence that amplified their every move. The metal walls were coated with rust and moisture, giving the impression of long-term neglect. Even though the exterior of the ship appeared intact, the air grew heavier with each step, as if the room was filled with more than just atmosphere. Their flashlights illuminated a central console that looked like something out of an 80s movie, analog buttons, levers, and tangled wires. There were signs that people had been here before, but it was clear that they hadn't died inside. There were no bodies and no evidence of the submarine's last operation. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from above. Brendan and John jerked their heads up, but before they could react, the hatch slammed shut with a loud bang. They immediately tried to contact the Orion, but the signal was completely dead. Meanwhile, The crew aboard the ship was powerless to help as the sealed hatch cut Brendan and John off from their companions. Then the sub began to vibrate. Not a violent movement, but a constant vibration that immediately unsettled the two men. They could feel what was happening, and before they could fully comprehend it, the vessel began to slowly sink. Below the surface, it was then that Brendan and John, trapped inside, felt the increasing pressure around them. The Orion lost all visual and radar contact with the submarine, going from intermittent signals to complete disappearance. The panicked Coast Guardsmen aboard the ship could do nothing but watch helplessly as their teammates vanished into the depths of the ocean, a situation that left them fearing they might never see Brendan and John again. But if the fear outside was overwhelming, imagining what was happening inside was even more terrifying. Despite the circumstances, Brendan and John did their best to remain calm as they continued to explore. They knew the sub was sinking, but it was doing so in an unusual way. There were no water leaks, no creaks or noises that would indicate structural failure. This realization provided a small measure of relief. As Brendan examined the walls and console, a sudden thought struck him. This was designed to avoid detection. It was an obvious conclusion. His companion pointed out they had noticed it from the beginning, though Brendan seemed to be just now realizing it. As they searched for answers, they came to a metal door at the end of the corridor. Behind that door, they believed, might lie the key to understanding the ship's purpose, or perhaps something far more terrifying. Hours passed as the sub continued to navigate underwater. Brendan and John pressed on through the dimly lit corridors, growing increasingly anxious. The air felt thick and heavy, probably due to the limited supply inside the ship. As they walked through the cold metallic corridors, they found themselves walking in circles. Realizing they weren't getting anywhere, they decided to inspect the machinery, hoping to activate something that might bring the sub back to the surface. The technology was rudimentary, control panels with exposed wires and sealed compartments that seemed to serve no clear purpose. They felt the sub vibrate through the water again, but this time it was different, almost as if it was slowly rising. This gave them a brief moment of relief, but something didn't add up. There were still no signs of leaks or structural failures, which made them uneasy. Shadows seemed to stretch out in the corners, playing tricks on their imaginations. Then they stumbled upon something that made them frown. There was a hidden panel covered with the dust of time. When they pried it open with a grating creak, they saw what was inside. Equipment clearly intended for military use, though outdated, with markings indicating that it had been there much longer than it should have been. But that wasn't all. At the back of the compartment, they found a large sealed box that didn't look like it was meant for supplies. Driven by curiosity, they decided to open it, and what they found inside unsettled them deeply. Packages wrapped in black plastic, marked in a way that strongly suggested their contents. Drugs, large quantities of drugs. This discovery changed everything. Everything they thought they understood about the submarine. Now they realized its true purpose and why it was drifting, seemingly abandoned. For a moment, they thought that the thick air, the vibrating environment, and their growing discomfort were the result of this shocking revelation. They dramatically assumed that they were in the grip of an emotional shock, but they couldn't have been more wrong. The thick air was due to the lack of oxygen, and the vibrations weren't just ambient. They were the final moments of the submarine's ascent to the surface. The vibration they feel in the hull makes them think they're about to escape the crushing pressure of the water, but their relief is short-lived. As the sub emerges from the depths, they are met with a sight more surreal than anything they've seen before. A massive floating platform surrounded on all sides by water looms in front of them. It resembles an offshore oil platform. Brendan and John have no idea where they've landed. There's no land in sight for miles, which is overwhelming in itself, but the most striking feature is the sheer size and presence of this enormous floating structure. Overcome with fear, the two men quickly hide, crouching behind the submarine's control console. They hear the sound of men opening the hatches and banging on the rusty steel as they climb inside. It's obvious these workers are from the rig. Soon they begin unloading heavy crates from the submarine and transporting them to the floating structure. The work is steady and unhurried, much to the growing anxiety of Brendan and John. They are forced to stay hidden for what seems like an eternity, watching these men at work, praying they won't be discovered, and hoping that this ship will eventually leave the area. As the crates pile up on the ground, Brendan and John watch in growing horror. The cargo being unloaded isn't just supplies or equipment, it's tons of cash and drugs, all illegal and tied to a criminal underworld. The rig workers move about calmly, as if what they're doing is just another part of their routine. But for the two Coast Guardsmen, this is a completely alien and frightening world. One false move could ensure that this is the last time they see anything or anything at all. Both men were terrified. Even though they were Coast Guardsmen with some military training, they were just two against many, which put them in a dangerous situation. It wasn't the kind of danger that came from fear of implosion or dying underwater, but rather the fear of being discovered and tortured. To add to their misery, the fact that they were military men meant that they couldn't just be let go with. Threats they knew they would be killed if they were caught. Their only hope was to make sure they weren't seen under any circumstances. Not even the slightest hint of their presence could be revealed. All they could do was watch from the shadows, praying to remain just that. Shadows. It was clear in both their minds, the overwhelming urge to escape. They knew they were witnessing something they were never meant to see. But the question was, where could they run to? They were stranded in the middle of the ocean. Swimming was out of the question. The best they could hope for was to be patient, wait for the workers to load the next shipment, and sneak away once they reached an island. But more importantly, they had proof. If they could impound the sub, or plant a tracker on it, this time they'd have enough to put an end to this trafficking operation. Still, staying hidden carried the constant risk of discovery. At any moment, the workers unloading the crates could find them. The two Coast Guards felt the weight of time pressing against them. A bold option was to come out of hiding, infiltrate the tower, and look for some sort of ship to escape the area. But that was just as dangerous. Their options were running out. The best course of action seemed to be to wait for a chance to get off the submarine and hope they wouldn't end up somewhere worse. As time passed, the sense of urgency grew. Should they escape and return to their ship to save their lives, or stay and risk everything for a chance to gather crucial evidence that could dismantle this criminal operation? Their options seemed limited. They made the bold decision to cautiously leave their hiding place and gather more information, even if it was just an approximate location to direct reinforcements. Stepping outside, they found themselves in the middle of a huge metal structure illuminated by bright lights that pierced the darkness of the ocean around them. The sound of waves crashing against the metal pillars was deafening. They realized that they were indeed on an old oil rig, now repurposed for smuggling operations. But they had what they were looking for, their communicators. Now that they were above sea level, they could call for help. They stayed hidden, moving carefully to avoid detection, looking for not only a place with useful information, but also a way to contact their base of operations to request intervention. If they played their cards right, the situation could be made easier. They continued to advance, taking advantage of the fact that everyone was focused on unloading the drug shipment. The operation was being overseen by an elegant man, sharply dressed and standing out from the rest of the workers. The place was obviously quite empty. It was obvious that it was only used for transportation, and there were no communicators, indicating that those controlling the submarine were elsewhere. With this confidence, they decided to call the ship and let them know what was happening. Of course, it wasn't difficult to locate the station. They knew there weren't many underwater oil rigs in the area, and they knew exactly which one had been taken. So all they had to do was wait for help to arrive. Luckily, they weren't too far away, and within minutes they saw the smugglers start to panic. The Coast Guard ship was heading straight for their location, causing chaos. It wasn't long before the smugglers ordered the ship to stop, or they would take action, threatening to use weapons. The smugglers had no choice but to stop, and in the end, the authorities were able to apprehend them. As a result, both Brendan and John were hailed as heroes and returned home alive.